Last time, one thing we were talking about, one topic, was that you can see where a certain system will will make a break, go down this fork in the conceptual road, but then we'll try to get the advantages of the other fork back later on in its system. And and one thing that we're mentioning is that Gelugpa's laugh at the idea that this is mind. Because if it's mind, it has to know something. And what does it know? But they say it's of the same entity as mind. One way of rescuing it is to describe the misperception as Yang Che Dunawa. This is the misperception. Yang means distant. Che means like cut off. So appearing as if distant and cut off. So that's what it means for objects to appear to be different entities from the consciousness apprehending them, right? Distant and cut off. Makes sense. And so when you see things as mind only, you see them as being of the same entity as consciousness. You see them as being not distant and not cut off from the perceiver. And then, so that's one way of a little bit blending it back, so that you don't get a sense of, well, the wall's one thing, and my consciousness perceiving it or whatever is another. You rescue that a little bit. And then in Buddhahood, it's said that the hairs on a Buddha's head perceive all phenomena. The palace, the Mandala palace, perceives all phenomena. It is mind. Now you can say it is mind and it's an appearance of mind, but also it's said that there are debates on that one. Still trying to maintain something, difference between mind and appearance of mind. But it said the Buddha's house perceives all phenomena. So then, if you took that backwards, took the resultant point of view and used that to look at the ordinary world, well, maybe these things, we've just covered them up with so much garbage that since they're within the entity of consciousness, those two are mind, covered with garbage. So that's where Gelug rescues it, and other systems will just say out and out that everything's just mind. Now, Asanga, when he speaks about other powered natures, frequently refers to them as Dokpa. He, as a substitute for Shenwan, will use Dokpa. That's really odd. Because if you look at Dokpa as conceptual consciousness, what happened to all the other consciousnesses? But this is taken as meaning Kamsungi Sem Semjong. So that means Kamsungi Semtan Semjong. So here, I think it's all right to translate it the same way. I mean, after all, it's the same word in Tibetan. But conceptuality has a much wider meaning and refers to any mind or mental factor of a being within the so you see a very wide meaning makes sense out of what Asanga is saying, but then you have to limit Shenwang to being minds and mental factors. And you can understand that in a system of mind only, the only things that would be Shenwang are Sem and Semjung, right? So what's being eliminated is when you get beyond the Kam Sum, which are Tukam, Sukam, Sumekam. So those who hold that indeed all other powered phenomena are just mind get some bolstering here. So how can Gelupa scholars say, oh, well, it doesn't mean that, given that that is what it means, or given that's what it's said to mean? It's glossed that way. How do you widen it out, or what would be your interpretive move or your trick or whatever you want to say?
Could you include minds and mental factors with their objects, just saying all they really mean? Also the objects.
That'd be one way of doing it. That's you're functioning within the system now, coming up with some way. That isn't the way it's done, but it's a typical way. That the main other powered natures are minds and mental factors. So that rescues tables, chairs, bodies, and so forth as being other powered natures. And from one point of view, you can see the value in saying that other powered natures are just minds and mental factors, right? You can see it has a real impact because these things are just included within the entity of minds and mental factors. In another way, it becomes difficult to posit, post office and letter and body and so forth. But Tsongkhapa did say in an earlier work, his work on the Alaya Vijnana, the Kunshi Number Sheva, that's the mind basis of all. So in Asanga's and Vasubandhu's mind-only system, there are 8 consciousnesses. The usual consciousnesses, so this is the afflicted mentality. The mentality or intellect, whatever you want to say, that has afflictions, so afflicted mentality. This is the mind that misconceives the person as being substantially existent. So what does the Nyimonjengi Yi do? It apprehends the person as being substantially existent in the sense of being self-sufficient, able to go it alone. For instance, Gendon Lothar said in Hamburg, when I was there in 1971, he said, well, as an example, now that I'm here in Hamburg all alone, I have to type for myself, I have to make food for myself, I have to do all these things. That's like a common meaning of Rangya Tulu. And then also seeing other phenomena as the objects of use of a substantially existent, of a person that is substantially existent in the sense of being self-sufficient. So it does apply to other phenomena. You drive around Charlottesville and there's a new whatever store, and you think, that's an object of use. object of enjoyment, right? Use can sound totally pejorative. But what is an object of use of? We often see it as an object of use of, not some just I or person, but one that is substantialized into being self-sufficient. And once you see it as that, when the roof of the ice skating rink falls in, or, the Omni closes or something like that, then, this affects that. You're tied into a system of emotions that are false. You could say, it still affects you, in fact, if these things close down. But the one that, we really get excited about and so forth is this exaggerated person. Rangya Tube, Zayir Ki. Rangya Zayir Ki. Tar Ki. Long Jeja the Truth. These things, like the ice skating rink, are established as objects of use, of enjoyment, of a self, a person, that is substantially existent in the sense of being self-sufficient. Okay? These are like bedrock concepts in, if you don't know them and you can't say them, and if it's something like, well, you say it and I can react to it, and that's only the level you're at, well, that's better than not knowing it at all. But you've got to be able to, if you're going to talk to somebody, I had some discussions with Galurum on these topics, and if I had to get out a piece of paper and look at it or whatever, And it's also hard to think about it then, right? If you're only in a reactive mode. And Rangyatube, Tseyurki, Daki Lom Jejadu, Truba, and then Trubar Zimba, right? So these are all Kansaki Tanzin, right? Both of them. Even though with one of them, you are viewing other objects as objects of use of a substantially existent, a person that is substantially existent in the sense of being self-sufficient. That's a conception of a self of persons, right? You can see that within that, the main factor that's being talked about is this person that is using these. I'm not talking about in a sense, you are talking about an inflated status of the object because it's an object of use of such a person. But you're not talking about something like perceiving it as an entity cut off from consciousness, where you can really say it is the object that you're misconceiving. What's being misconceived is the status of the self that's using it. But then that thereby certainly brings about an encrustment or overlay on the object. No question. No question. That's what the Nyomung Jenki Yi does. Yi for short, right? Yeah. So that's what the seventh consciousness does. Namshe Dumba. Then what is the eighth consciousness? Well then, what consciousness misconceives subject and object to be different entities? Sungzin Ngo Tade Du Zimbe Namshe, it'll be Trukpa. That's the only one that's left. Not Nyumung Chengi Yi. That does the Chirkidatu Zimba. Right? Chirkidatu Zimba. So the one that does the misapprehension of a self of phenomena, which means no tade du trubar zimba, and rangsa do vishenshi rangisendi ki trubar zimba. So that's the sixth consciousness, namshe trukwa, that does the chirkitan zindu zimba. So And so the Guji Namasheva is a consciousness that is going to be transformed into the mirror-like wisdom. It's really an interesting way to begin talking about it. The Melon Gabu Geshe, it is eventually transformed at Buddhahood, you know, the very first moment of Buddhahood, as the mirror-like melon, in that it, now what's the connection between the Ujjanamasheva, the Alaya Vijnana, or Vijnana, but not Vijnana? That's European and American type of pronunciation, Vijnana. In India nowadays, people say Vijnana, and another possible pronunciation is Vijnana. So Milandavayeshe means that it reflects all phenomena unimpededly. And so in the ordinary state, the all phenomena, all objects of the senses appear to the Alaya Vijnana, but they are not recognized. They're not known. They're not noticed. It's incapable of inducing ascertainment. So it's nanamange. So it's, as Tsongkhapa says, a namba rikpa, mi rikpa. It's namba rikpa, but it's mi rikpa. Mi rikpa doesn't mean ignorance of something. It's like, I forget the line that comes before it in the root text to his book on this. It's one of the early things that were translated. Gareth Sparham has translated it as the ocean of eloquence based on the flashier part of the title. Not just the root text, but the commentary. And so you're getting that sort of like it cognizes these things but doesn't ascertain them, something like that. Because Nanamange, even in some sense, knows the object, but it doesn't induce ascertainment. Otherwise, you could say that this was Nanamange. Something was appearing to it, but it couldn't induce ascertainment, right? It's got to be a consciousness. So it apprehends its objects without noticing. It's a very bare meaning of apprehend. So you see, this consciousness has this, even in the ordinary state, of being able to reflect everything that appears to the senses. I don't know as it reflects what appears to the to a conceptual consciousness. You would need to check on that. And you can see then how this would be the one that is transformed into the Nirvana among the five Buddha wisdoms. Now the other function is as a repository of the seeds of perception that cause us to see this brown table and to have an eye consciousness apprehending the brown. It's not the presence of an external world of brown table that impinges on our consciousness. Rather, there is one seed of perception that produces the appearance of the object and the appearance of the subject apprehending it. Then there's another seed that produces the appearance of the object, as we were talking about, as distant and cut off. And in the same, I would have to say, of the subject as distant and cut off from the object. And then another seed that causes the object to, some people say a separate seed, that causes the object to appear to be established by way of its own character as a referent of terms and conceptual consciousnesses, right? And also, I mean, even more complex is then how we're all having this collective perception, right? Which this Thomas Woods calls collective hallucination, which is sort of helpful. Helpful one way, and it knocks out valid cognition entirely if these are all hallucinations. You follow? In order to maintain valid cognition, there has to be one level of these valid cognitions and another level of hallucinations. And I guess that would, my own way of looking at it, would be that we're beings of similar type, and you ought to be involved in the collective hallucination, rather the collective perceptions, to a great extent, rather than substituting individual hallucinations, which then are hallucinations. Now, why do proponents of mind only get into this position? It's because yogis can walk through walls, the external, they can do all sorts of things with the so-called external world. And in order to explain that fact, much as Nyingma brings the perspective of the resultant state of Buddhahood into the regular layout, so they want to bring they see this as the important perspective to bring into the regular layout. And so you've got to, it's essential, in some way it's a yogically based system this way. I mean, you have to say all of them are, but Geshe Wangyal said that mind only was the, he didn't use these words, but the Indian system, the Proto-Indian system, the fundamental Indian system. Why? He didn't spell it all out, but I knew from the context what he was talking about. You're talking about, yoga and being able to do extremely unusual things with the so-called environment. And, when you achieve, it doesn't take being at the level of calm abiding, I don't know what stage it is, you have a sense of your consciousness penetrating the object. As Jamyam Sheba says, you'll be piercing the object. You see, this difference between subject and object is cut down, and your mind is piercing the object, even in a state you see of calm abiding. That's how a mind-only type system gets to be, so let's call it the foundational system. Why? And it's the foundational system, you could say, mystical system all around the world. Because people are, they're getting such penetration into some sort of oneness this startling breakdown of the so-called external world, that, this is religious experience. And it's awesome. It's, for a beginner, it's frightening. There's Carl Jung speaks about a Swiss Christian, I believe, yogi type, who, when he had such a vision, bashed his head on a rock that was in front of him. You see? So moving, so horrifying, it's so terrifying also. And Rudolf Otto, which I don't know how much people read Rudolf Otto anymore, but I think it's very important, talks about the mysterium tremendum. But the terrifying quality of this mystery, if you look within Buddhist systems, is merely due to the fact that we're not used to this state. And for instance, in Nyingma, one way of describing this at-home feeling when you are used to it, or when you slip into it without any sense, of just knowing your own face, as often said in East Asian Buddhism, but also said in Nyingma. You can translate, and there are things like, the metaphor being used of, it's as if you never knew your face before you saw this. You're identifying your own face, your own entity, your own being, your own. This is called, sometimes you can just slip into it with no sense of horror. So you don't have to get the sense, oh, well, I couldn't have been that because I wasn't horrified. It's called a child coming up on, entering, being set on its mother's lap. That means when it wants to. They're really delighted. The mother isn't scolding it or etc. When I turn it over and spank it, it's just so happy to be home, Just so happy to be on mother's lap. It's a psychologically evocative term to describe that state. How do we get off on this?
Talking about the functions of the Gunshin version.
Yeah, I think, okay, yes, we'll loop back to that. It's the repository of the seeds of perception. And that, if we make a difference between Gunshi, Gunshi Namba Sheva, then Gunshi are the seeds, not the repository. Because the repository is Gunshi Namba Sheva. Now, these are not Ngo Tade, they're Ngo Chi. The seeds are deposited in the consciousness, but the seeds themselves are not consciousnesses. These potencies for perceptions in the future that are established by actions, by perceptions, and so forth. So why do we see a brown table? Because we've seen a brown table before, which is called Riktungi Pakcha. Now the word for seed is savin, and a synonym in this system is Pakcha, which I translate as predisposition, and seed. You can see why they mean the same thing. So the type of Pakcha that gives rise to the mere appearance is Riktungi Pakcha. You can see predispositions of similar type, Riktungi Pakcha. So where I was coming from was this type of explanation doesn't seem completely satisfying to me, because are we like the Groundhog Day fellow who's constantly redoing what was done before? And then does everything have to be ordered in exactly the way it was before? If that was the case, you could never get out of cyclic existence, you could never attain Buddhahood. Will and karma is mainly semba, chaitana in Sanskrit, which would be translated as intention, will. Will, intention wouldn't have any place at all, maybe. Well, certainly it wouldn't if it was completely mechanical. But maybe these are all like jumbled up sorts of things, and we're together because, and a whole lot of the rest of us are together because we have similar jumbles. Similar, but not the same jumbles. Maybe. And then you take those jumbles and, they don't have to rejumble the same way, but and you're adding constantly new perceptions in. New? No. I don't know, You get all hung up. So where I was spinning off on that was, when we got to the proto-system, the foundational system, was it's like despite these difficulties, they've got an agenda that they want to bring in. And it's like, okay, with the problems. Still, this is so important that this be understood, that there's no external world. The external world as we see it, just plain isn't there. And now, are there other beings than yourself? When we see somebody else's body, whose predispositions are operating when we see their body? Whose? When you see her body, whose predispositions are operating for you?
Mine.
Yeah, it's your own. So we all have, interestingly enough, predispositions for seeing these bodies. And of course, we're seeing the bodies differently, everybody has to admit, and pleasantly and unpleasantly and neutral and, you know, all the gradations of, let's just say it's all within gradations of pleasant. And, you know, external world theory people are asked, well, what are there? Are there, you know, whatever, are there 13 bodies there? You know, the external world people that are generating all these different consciousnesses, they have to talk about the karmic overlay themselves. Or how much is karmic overlay of the perceiver? Right? We're talking about the hungry ghost that sees this as pus and blood. Very same stuff. The hell being, well, usually they use hungry ghost. Yida sees it as pus and blood. The tundra, like a fish, sees it, a little fish, as a place to live in. A neck, kawanasane. And a human sees it as coconut fluid. And a god sees it as ambrosia. And it functions as all of these. So then are all of these present here? You have to say yes. We've got to hack at the external world. You know, you can't say there are just problems with the no external world theory. You got to see the problems in external world theory. Are all of these present here? Yes. Or is what's present here only what you see? Different types of beings seeing different things. Within Buddhist framework, this is just bedrock. You have to, you know, the karma of the being determines what's being seen and what functions. As I remember, some people say that you have the 3 or 4 different substances occupying the same place. Giant Shiva, for instance, says you have, it's 1/4, but he's using 3 examples, so it's 1/3 pus and blood, it's 1/3 ambrosia, and it's 1/3 you know, coconut juice, or a place to live. You get many varieties within that, but somehow each sees it as a full ball, okay? And these are problems you get into with the external world. I mean, and you have to, even though his position sounds extremely odd and off the wall, you can appreciate why he has to say this. Unless you just say, well, I don't want to bother with this.
Which text did Jim Young Shave this in?
Omachemo. And Cosort sent me the material that we worked on, and I could, the mind-only part, I could look through the mind-only part and put it on reserve or something like that. Because it's really neat. It's where you know, it's for somebody who has faith that Dilpa scholars can work out everything. your faith is broken at that point. And, you know, you have to switch to seeing that there are many different sources of food for thought within Calif, and pass from this hope that somebody could get it all straight. Now, of course, a lot of geishas and lamas are putting on the front that everything's being explained right, especially in their own college,
Right.
right? Or only in their own college, which is silly in itself. They're not just saying Tsongkhapa, they're saying Jitsumpa, Jamyangship. But then they themselves, when they go in the debating courtyard, are making a mess out of both Jamyang Sheba and Tsongkhapa. They know if they're any good, they know how to do this better than anybody else. But there's a value in communicating a basic system. I don't know how much value there is, though, in gulling people into thinking that you've got all the answers. You know, why do it that way? So the body that you're seeing is due to your own pakcha. And what the person sees is due to her own pakcha, right? And the experiences and so forth. Okay. But now what about when you have clairvoyance? And you know somebody else's mind directly. Now this system still posits clairvoyance, doesn't it? This system posits that there are other beings. No question. You're not the only being. Dharmakirti has a text called Yushen Truba. Yushen Truba, where he's establishing that there are other continuums, other continuums of consciousness. So there's no question, well, that's Dharmakirti anyway. You know, there's this question of, is there just one Gushinamasheva, or does each being have a Gushinamasheva? Tsongkhapa's position is that each being does. Otherwise, when one person attains the Mirondabo Yeshe, then everybody should attain it, if there's only one. Mm-hmm. And in terms of individual liberation, individual development of Buddhahood, it makes a lot of sense. But when you look in some other systems, there's some like overall consciousness, and you'd have to look for how Gelugpas somehow get back to that. When they say Chirgung Nyakchik, the one soul truth body, you know, how does that fit? Anyway, everybody has or there is an Alaya Vijnana that has every one of us. There are Alaya Vijnanas that have each of us, one by one. It's not so much that I have an Alaya Vijnana, right? Doesn't the Alaya Vijnana have me?
Well, isn't it said that the Alaya Vijnana is what's found when you look for something?
That's what's said when you look for the person.
For
That's what you come up with.
For a Sangha's system.
Yes.
How would they explore
For a Sangha
the
system.
sixth consciousness system? What do you find?
It will be a neutral form of the mental consciousness. That's what's claimed. I don't know as you'll find a single word in mind-only literature from India that ever says that. The Alaya Vijnana is the consciousness that goes from lifetime to lifetime. It carries all these predispositions, and so it sort of has to be the person if there is a person. So when you have clairvoyance of somebody else's mind and directly perceiving the other person's mind, that appearance of the other person's mind, is that due to your own pakcha? I mean, it sort of has to be, but then it wouldn't be a direct perception, would it? Or then the other person's mind is, the other person's disappearance of the person's body, I don't, so what is said is that the number, it's just a fudge term, number of the other person's mind, something like shaking number, which you really couldn't say an aspect of the other person's mind is what you are directly perceiving. You can't say aspect. Aspect has a very wide meaning. If you took the wider meaning, it's you can't even say representation. Maybe it means that. It's just a point where you have to fudge when it comes to clairvoyantly knowing another person's mind. So this topic, God, we've had enough, haven't we? Is called Common Objects of Perception, which is this first thing of we're all seeing the table. And then when you press on that topic, you eventually, and the answer is, well, we all have similar pacha, and it's like two people in a room having a similar dream. Did you dream of New York City last night? You say, I dreamt of New York City, and the other person says, I dreamt of New York City. You say, I dreamt of the train station, the other person's Grand Central. Oh, I dreamt of Grand Central too. And, it's like the pacha are operating at the same time. But then when you press, you start asking about clairvoyance. And then the answers have to fudge. I mean, if you thought the other answers are fudging, then this is all the more fudging. So, for the next time. Now what we're going to do, if you would read 151 to 169 in Reflections on Reality. That's 18 pages. And then go back over the material that you read in Reflections on Reality. So then we will have read from 1 to 169, but not really talked about it. And prepare, topics for discussion, qualms, something you want to go into in more detail within those 169 pages. We obviously won't cover them. But we don't want to just read and not pursue the interesting points.